Today's episode is brought to you by Media for All, which was set up to help encourage more Black, Asian, and other ethnic talent into media, and to provide a support and mentoring network to ensure talent flourishes in the media industry that we all love. If you're looking for a mentor or would like to mentor young ethnic talent, check them out at mediaforall.org.uk, and it is all 100% free. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders, and this week is absolutely no different. I'm on a call with Chetna Soni, who is Senior Director and Category Head at P&G ISC Feminine Care. Chetna, for those in the audience who don't know who you are and what you do, could you give us an overview?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here, Tom. My name is Chetna Soni. I work in Procter& Gamble, and I currently lead the feminine hygiene business for the Indian subcontinent. I've been working for nearly 13 years now, and all of it has been in P&G. And during that time, I've had the privilege of working across two categories. One is feminine care and the other is hair care. And I've handled a lot of different markets across India, Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. In my current job, I work with a wonderful, diverse team that looks after everything on the Whisper brand, which is the key brand I handle, from product design and innovation, sales and marketing, strategy and plans, brand campaigns, all the way to supply chain and finance.
Fantastic. So let's ask you some getting to know you questions. So first of all, what has been your best investment of your time, energy, or money in your career?
I'd say that the best investment of my time has been the time I've spent outside of office and really understanding how things work on the ground, spending time with consumers, understanding their life, their aspirations, their pain points. And I say that time has been well invested because it has always provided valuable perspective on what is important and critical for my brand to succeed. It's also helped me appreciate who I am designing or innovating for, what's the environment in which my product is going to be placed, and most importantly, what's the context in which it is likely to be used or consumed by the end user, right? And this depth of insight is extremely handy when you are actually back in office and discussing business strategies, plans, etc., because the evaluation matrix is extremely clear in your head, right? So just to give you an example, one of the big things that I focus on in my current job is getting more girls to use sanitary napkins. So, one quick fact, in India, only around 50% of the menstruating population, even in urban India, actually uses sanitary napkins, right? You'd be surprised that rest of them still use things like cloth, sometimes even more unhygienic methods, right? So obviously a big part of the work that I do is interviewing hundreds of girls at their homes, really trying to understand menstruation habits and challenges. And one of the things that we've discovered is actually the mother is the person who decides what is the product that the girl will use, right? So that insight has significantly shifted my and our lens of evaluation for our products, for our packaging, our communication, to how the mother is actually going to interpret it versus the daughter who is the actual user.
And so, how often do you do this? How often do you go in market and do these interviews and meet your consumers?
So we try and find as many opportunities as possible, right? And in my case, I can say that over the last 12 months, I have spoken to at least one consumer every month, right? And I think earlier before the pandemic, going and speaking to them face to face was sometimes a restriction. After the pandemic has come about, we've also innovated and found virtual ways of doing that, right? So really now it totally depends on us how frequently we want to do it, but I make sure that every month I at least have one consumer conversation and try and get to see what's happening in the store context.
And given the very personal nature of the product, do you find you're getting a different type of research or insight from doing it virtually, or would you prefer to go back to doing it in person?
So I think on some of the things, I would say virtual works just as well, right? So when you're talking more in context of product and really trying to understand what works for them, what doesn't work for them, I think virtual works just as well. There are some things I miss about going and doing this face to face, which is really looking at how they live, for example, right? What is the context in which they are actually consuming the product? So one of the things that we try and understand whenever we talk to a consumer in an in-home context is see their sanitation facilities, right? That has a big impact on how they use the product. So those are the things that you cannot actually see from a virtual context. So that's the one part that I definitely miss, and I hope that I get a chance to do it again soon.
So I think that's a lovely bit of advice and really reassuring to hear that you do that. But what advice would you give to a student who was looking to follow in your footsteps and get into the industry, assuming they were doing all the right things about good CVs and networking and all that kind of stuff? What are the key things that you look for from people who are trying to get on your team or get into the industry?
Sure. One of the exciting parts of my job is that I get to interact with a lot of young people. We have these campus connects that we do. And of course, every year we have new hires who join the company. One of my observations is that there's a perception that being in marketing means that you'll spend all of your time doing quote unquote glamorous things like, designing marketing campaigns, making cool ads, designing KOL plans, etc. Right. And to be honest with you, I myself used to believe that when I was a student more than a decade back. And then once I joined PNG, I realized that that is just one part of the job, right? Actually, at the core of marketing is understanding consumer needs, their path to purchase journey, even analyzing trends using hard data to understand what's really happening on the business, and using all of those insights to design the right proposition and then create the creative idea, the campaign, the KOL plan, etc. Right. So my advice actually to a young student who's about to join the industry would be to come in prepared to delve really deep into the business and be prepared to flex his or her skills to create a broader impact. And I'm saying this not just from a client side lens, right? From an FMCG client side lens, but even for creative agencies, right? We've seen this. I've seen the transformation firsthand. Creative agencies that have traditionally focused only on campaign ideas have realized that they can actually create much more value for their clients if they start partnering on business solutions and not just advertising solutions. In fact, one of the things that has worked very well for us is our agencies have also embraced that mindset, and just the quality of business building ideas that has been coming from their side has been phenomenal.
Can you give me an example of that?
Sure, I can give you an example. So, one of the challenges that we've been working through over the last 1 year. We've this campaign called Keep Girls in School. I'll talk about it a little bit later. And the whole idea behind the campaign is um, stopping girls from dropping out of school at puberty. So one of the facts that we have in India is nearly 20% of girls when they get their period for the first time actually drop out of school, right? It's a really startling fact and an extremely heart-wrenching event to happen. And the reason for that is when a girl gets a period for the first time, in most cases she really doesn't know what is happening to her, and there is a lot of shame and embarrassment associated with that. So they start missing out school during periods and then eventually start dropping out, right? And we made a campaign around it last year, and then the whole pandemic happened, right? And schools across the country were totally shut. So we were trying to find ways of helping girls continue their education now that schools were not happening, right? We were quite worried that the problem of girls dropping out of school is actually going to become even more aggravated because schools by themselves are getting shut. So we engaged with our agency. Actually, we work with the Leo Burnett in India, and we wanted to understand what is it that we can do about it as a brand. So they came up with this platform called Mobile Shala, which is mobile school, if you will, where we created a web based platform which had educational lessons related to the core subjects in school, right? From the grades of 6th to 10th standard. And we were also able to translate that into different languages so that we cater to the diverse, language proficiency in the country. So that's an example where our creative agency actually came up with a business idea and a platform idea, and not just a marketing campaign idea.
Oh, thanks for sharing that story. That sounds fascinating. I'll put a link to that case study in the show notes if you can share that later. So I'm curious to know, in your career today, what has been that best bit of marketing advice? What's that marketing tip that you find yourself giving most often that you always fall back on?
Yeah, so one of the, it's from very early on in my career when I had just joined and I was this bright eyed new hire, really looking to learn from the best minds in the industry. I'll share with you what the learning is first and then just a quick story behind it. So I learned very early on the importance of, anchoring your communication, your feedback on ideas to the people that you work with on the objective or the problem that you're trying to solve for, right? Whether it's from a consumer angle or a business angle, and not just focus on the first idea or the first solution that comes to your mind. That was the big tip that I learned. And over the years, I have realized that it has been a huge enabler to getting the best ideas from a diverse team, right? And it plays a very important role as a leader in your ability to get the best ideas from the team, because you anchor the team's energy on the problem or the consumer issue that you're trying to solve for, and then everybody comes up with their own ideas, right? And then you try and build on each other and get the best idea to happen. And I learned this via a very interesting process that we have in the company, where the youngest person in the room is actually asked to give the feedback the first on any advertising ideas that are presented, right? And the reason for that is we really believe in learning on the job as a company, and we encourage getting the right experiences to do that. So as always, the creative agency presented an idea and I was the first one to go, and I was super nervous and I managed to mumble something, and it was on the lines of, this is what the protagonist is doing in the story, and why don't you make her do this instead? Right? So he came up, my marketing director, this gentleman called Balachandran Jayachandran, he came up to me after the meeting and coached me about the importance of articulating the feedback in context of the objective versus really falling in love with the solution or the execution that I had in mind. So it has really stayed with me over all these years, and I always anchor any ideation conversations first on what's the problem that we're trying to solve.
And can you tell me what your manager said to you exactly?
He said, if you ask them to draw a triangle, they will come and show you a triangle, and you will be like, okay, this works for me, right? But there is no context in that of what was I actually trying to do from the beginning. I don't know whether drawing a triangle is even the solution to the problem that I was trying to solve, or maybe it should be a square, right? This is verbatim the analogy that he used.
I love that idea of the youngest person having to give their responses first. That's definitely something I think a lot of us should try. This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we are at the halfway point now. So what we're going to do is switch to your shiny new object, which is purpose-led brand building. Now, I think I know what that means, but can you explain to the audience what you mean by that and why it's your shiny new object?
Sure. So, purpose-led brand building has become kind of a buzzword in the marketing and advertising world. And I would say it has gained even more popularity in the post-COVID era because brands have been trying to find ways to be more relevant in the new context. And the reason it is my shiny new object because it's a personal passion area for me, and fortunately, it's a big part of my work on feminine hygiene over the last 8 years. And really, what does purpose mean, right? The literal meaning of purpose is your reason for being. I actually prefer the term force for good because I believe it elevates the impact that you can have to a much larger cause, and also resonates a lot with my personal value system of being good and doing good. Um, and I think the concept, a lot of people struggle to understand it as to, when we are in the business of building brands and selling products, what does purpose really have to do with that, right? And I really believe that brands are one of the most pervasive forces in the world, and I also believe that they have a responsibility to make it a better place. It's a fact that, like movies, music, any media, even advertising, really shapes how we perceive and see things. In fact, even how we are seen. And advertising can influence society and culture, right? So the whole idea behind purpose-led brand building or being a force for growth is, how do you use the power that you have as a brand to bring about a positive societal impact?
So this is a subject that I discussed actually earlier this week on another recording. With well, actually, I'll keep his powder dry because he can have his own moment in the recording. But and it's really stuck with me that the idea that you could be an activist, you can make change happen, working for a large corporate. And I think there's research that has come out that the representation of smaller minorities and communities, that perceptions of things like LGBTQ plus people can be changed by advertising. Like if those audiences are represented, then it can actually bring around positive change. So it's hugely exciting to hear you talk about that. But what I'm always curious about is, but how do you do that? Like, what is the process for making sure that your advertising is definitely helping, but also helping in the right way? Because presumably there's no one really policing brands to do that the right way. So someone at a brand has to make that choice. So kind of how do you make it happen in the first place? And B, how do you make sure that you're actually saying the right message and doing the right thing?
Sure, that's a great question. I would give two pieces of advice on that. The first one I would say is, don't create a force for good campaign just because everybody is doing it. I mean, to the point you were just making, Tom, it has to come from a fundamental place of belief and desire to make a social impact. And there must be a very clear link between your force for good work and what you stand for as a brand, right? What's your brand's equity? What is the history that you've had? I was talking to you earlier about this program called Keep Girls in School, which focuses on stopping girls from dropping out of school at puberty, right? Now, for us as a brand, we are all about empowering girls and women to be whoever they want to be. And periods are really central to this issue, right? The whole part about dropping out of school happens at the point that a girl gets her period, right? So I believe we have a clear role to play in this context. Education, we believe, is a huge enabler to empowerment in a girl's life, and we really want to make sure that Indian girls can be independent and achieve their dreams, right? So when we were thinking about all the ways in which we can actually positively impact society and empower girls who are our core consumers, education actually came as one of the core challenges that a girl faces today when she hits puberty. And that's so that the first thing is, there should be a very, very clear linkage between what you are aspiring to do and the role that your brand can actually play in that, and the impact that your brand can make. So what do we do as part of the Keep Girls in School campaign? We essentially educate girls about puberty, and we help them understand why periods happen, how to manage them, and we also provide them access to pads by donating free pads so that they can actually continue pursuing their education, right? So that's the first one. The second tip that I would give is, it's really not restricted to being a marketing campaign or idea, right? We really need to step away from that kind of a mindset. It actually needs to be embedded in all aspects of a business, right from the consumers and communities that a brand serves, to its products, to its partner strategy, to its charitable causes, and also to its communication campaigns, right? And that's where the whole act part of it becomes very important. It's not just limited to a creative film that you will do and spend a certain small percentage of your advertising budget on it, right? It needs to be a part of the DNA of your organization. It needs to be a true passion project. And in our case, actually, we've been educating girls about puberty for more than 20 years now in India, and even longer in all parts of the globe. We've recently partnered with UNESCO to increase the impact of our on ground work. And this is completely integrated in our values as a team, not just within PNG, but also our creative partners. So, those would be the two pieces of advice I would give to somebody who's looking to start on this journey.
So, what advice would you give to someone who's working at a brand that is in one of the two following situations? The first situation is that they don't have the budget of a P&G brand. But then secondly, if they work for a brand that doesn't have such an obvious purpose, I think it's very good and actually quite fortunate that your purpose platform is pretty similar to your creative platform. Like if you go and support girls through puberty in within the realms of education, like that's what you stand for, and it fits ideally. But what if you're a gambling company? What if you're an FMCG, unhealthy treat food, or a takeaway brand, or I don't know, something that isn't so intrinsically linked to something like the opportunity that you have as a brand and a marketer. So how do you do this on a small budget, and how do you do it if there isn't an obvious purpose for you to represent?
Yeah. It's a great question, Tom. I'll try to answer that. I think the first part for me of being a force for good is starting out with the products that you manufacture and create, right? I mean, they by themselves need to deliver a positive experience for the consumer and a positive benefit in her life, right? I honestly, genuinely believe no business can be built without that. So that for me is the starting point, right? So think of it as purpose 1.0 is making superior products that deliver the benefits that consumers seek. And then purpose 2.0 is really elevating the impact that you can make as a brand beyond the products that you sell or the services that you provide. So that's the first really starting point of this. On the second question that you asked, which is on the on budgets, or if I'm a small brand, what do I do? And this is a fundamental belief I have, that when you are a force for good, you can also be a big force for growth. Standing up for something more than just the functional benefit, it really helps in establishing stronger connections with consumers, because you are authentic and you care about serving consumers and the society. You have values that consumers can relate to. And all of these things actually help in driving consumer preference, right? You will see a lot of researches with numbers ranging from a 70% to anywhere all the way to a 90% positive impact of actually resonating with your consumers on a cause that you jointly believe in. And in my personal experience on Whisper, I have seen instances of consumers standing up and being our advocates proactively without zero expectation of monetary rewards. And I really believe it's one of the strongest ways to build long lasting connections and brand loyalty. So even if I am a small brand with limited budget, I really believe that um, if you anchor yourself on a belief and an issue that consumers are also passionate about, you will also see the rewards for that in your growth numbers.
So, what would you say the biggest day-to-day challenges are with purpose-driven marketing?
That's an interesting question. I think there are some misconceptions, and because there is this desire to do something, because a lot of purpose work is happening, I feel like it gets misconstrued a little bit in the way some brands approach it, right? And I think that becomes the undoing of the campaign or the brand in some cases. I mean, when the brand is not being authentic and probably just taking advantage of a topical event or incident that has happened, consumers are actually able to see through that and will call out the brand for it. So for me, a very critical imperative while being a force for good is also doing good. So the act part of it, like I said before, is super important. So that for me is one aspect of it. I also believe you need a lot of support and belief as an ecosystem around you to invest behind this work. And by that, I don't just mean money, Tom, to the question that you were asking, right? This is a journey, and frankly, doing a one off thing in a year, it doesn't really create a meaningful impact on the brand, right? You need to keep on doing it consistently year after year, both for you to be seen as somebody who's truly committed to that purpose, and also for it to create a meaningful impact in the society, because the kind of changes we are talking about don't happen suddenly. They take a few years, sometimes more than that, to actually bring about a meaningful change in the society. So those for me would be two things I would say are challenges and make the whole process of doing this a bit difficult.
So we're coming up to the end of the podcast now, and I've really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot from the conversation. And I know that there will be a whole bunch of people out there, as there always is, who are dying to speak to you. How would you like them to get in touch with you?
Sure, I'll be very happy to share more on anybody with anybody who's interested. If somebody wants to reach out to me, they can do so on LinkedIn, and of course, it will help if you can share why you would like to connect.
And what makes a really brilliant outreach to you?
Um, that's a difficult one, Tom. So I mean,
Sorry.
honestly, the things that I pay attention to in my LinkedIn feed, right? Because you will get a lot of people writing into you, are the ones where I'm able to appreciate why this is a relevant outreach.
Right. Okay. That is great advice for all of us. Thank you so much, Chetna, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.